the strange new crew member. The Galactic Survey ship Zyrrak Prime was no stranger to unusual recruits. Its mission, to explore uncharted regions of space, required a diverse crew. Captain Vryz'ka, a six-limbed, chitin-covered KRRNAK, had worked with reptilians, amphibians, gaseous life forms, and even a sentient colony of fungi. But never before had the ship taken on a human. Lieutenant Jake Carter stood at attention in the dimly lit command deck, a grin on his face. Lieutenant Carter, reporting for duty. Vryz'ka clicked his mandibles, antennae twitching in mild annoyance. Humans were unpredictable. There were stories, some fascinating, some terrifying, about their peculiar habits. He had read reports of their irrational bravery, their alarming ability to bond with alien species, and their tendency to insert themselves into dangerous situations with reckless optimism. Vryz'ka had no intention of letting this human disrupt his ship. "You are here to study xenobiology," the captain stated, his voice a series of clicks translated through the ship's auditory system. "Not to cause trouble." Jake nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, sir. Studying new life forms is my specialty." Vryz'ka gestured to the gathered officers. "This is Dr. Zylok, our chief medical officer." A tall, serpentine reptilian with bioluminescent scales inclined his head slightly. "Human. Engineer, Thalai." The floating, translucent jellyfish-like entity pulsed in acknowledgement. "And Security Officer Gorvath." A massive, four-armed, armored behemoth crossed his arms unimpressed. "Hey, everyone," Jake said cheerfully. "Looking forward to working with you." Vryz'ka led Jake through the corridors, explaining ship protocols. As they approached the security sector, the captain's antennae twitched. "You should be aware, our security drones are highly aggressive. They will not respond well to unauthorized contact." The drone in question hovered nearby, a sleek, weaponized sphere of metal and blinking lights. Its programming was simple: eliminate threats. It had never been touched, nor had it ever displayed anything resembling emotions. Jake, upon seeing it, crouched slightly. "Hey there, buddy." The drone swiveled toward him, its weapons primed. The captain opened his mandibles to bark a warning, but before he could, Jake extended a hand, fingers wiggling in what seemed like an invitation. The entire security team tensed. The drone's lights flickered erratically. For a moment, it seemed as if it might fire. Then, to everyone's shock, it emitted a low, vibrating hum. The weapons retracted. The drone, an artificial construct designed only for violence, dipped slightly in the air, as if leaning into Jake's hand. Jake grinned. "It was a good little death machine." "You are." He patted its sleek surface. Silence. Vryz'ka felt his exoskeleton tighten. "What did you just do?" Jake shrugged. "Nothing. Just giving it some affection." The security officer stared, unsure how to react. The drone had never behaved like this. In fact, its previous encounters with unauthorized personnel had ended in dismemberment. Yet here it was, seemingly purring. "This is not normal," Vryz'ka muttered. The reptilian doctor hissed in agreement. "A human anomaly." The drone, now thoroughly petted, emitted a final beep before floating away. The crew watched it go, still processing what had just happened. Jake turned back to them, smiling. "So what's next?" Captain Vryz'ka rubbed his mandibles together in contemplation. Humans were going to be more of a problem than he had anticipated. The universal constant: pets and head pats. Captain Vryz'ka had dealt with many strange phenomena in his years of service, but nothing unsettled him quite like the human's compulsion to pet things. Over the next few weeks, Lieutenant Jake Carter's peculiar behavior escalated. It had started with the security drone, but that had merely been a warning sign. Soon, he was extending his baffling habit to the rest of the crew. The first incident: Dr. Zylok, the ship's reptilian medical officer, was the next victim. Zylok was a xener, a species known for its cold, logical approach to medicine. His iridescent scales shifted colors in response to temperature, and his species viewed physical contact as a form of dominance. a concept humans apparently failed to grasp. One day, Jake walked into the med bay for a routine checkup. As Xylotaith examined him, Jake's eyes fixated on the doctor's elongated neck, where small frill-like gill structures fluttered. "Hey, Doc," Jake said casually. "Mind if I try something?" Xylotaith barely looked up. "If this is another one of your human things, I would prefer you refrain." Too late. Jake reached out and gently scratched behind the doctor's frills. Xylotaith's body stiffened. His pupils dilated. A strange, involuntary hissing sound escaped his throat. Jake chuckled. "Oh man, you like that, don't you?" The doctor recoiled, looking horrified. That was highly inappropriate. His voice was breathy, as if he had just experienced something utterly alien. "Sorry, Doc," Jake said, raising his hands in surrender. "Didn't mean to freak you out. Just, looked like a good scratch spot." Xylotaith blinked rapidly. That is irrelevant." But his frills twitched, almost unconsciously, as if seeking more stimulation. He didn't bring it up again, but from then on, whenever Jake was nearby, Xylotaith seemed to hover just slightly closer than before. Thalai, the jellyfish engineer. Thalai, the ship's chief engineer, was a Rilnari, a species that resembled a floating mass of translucent tendrils. Their bodies were composed of a semi-solid gelatinous material that constantly pulsed with electrical energy. They communicated through bioluminescent flashes, making them difficult for most species to read. One day, Jake was helping repair a faulty coolant valve in engineering when he noticed Thalai hovering nearby, their tendrils waving in slow, rhythmic pulses. "Hey, Thalai," Jake said, wiping grease from his hands. "I've been wondering, what happens if I touch you?" Thalai's form flickered with shades of violet and blue, their equivalent of curiosity. Most organic species do not enjoy direct contact. We are conductive. Jake grinned. "I like a little static shock. Let's see." Before anyone could protest, he reached out and booped the jellyfish-like being on what seemed to be its center mass. A jolt of bioelectricity passed through his fingers, making his hair stand on end. "Oof, okay, yeah, that tingles," Jake said, shaking out his hand. "But, you okay there, buddy?" Thalai's tendrils rippled in what could only be described as a shiver. A deep cerulean glow spread through their body. Their lights flickered rapidly. Fascinating. From then on, whenever Jake entered engineering, Thalai would casually drift just within arm's reach. The Zyrrak encounter. The final straw for the crew came during a planetary survey mission. The Zyrrak Prime had landed on Zenthis for a jungle world filled with predatory fauna. As the crew collected samples, they encountered a Zyrrak, a towering, 8-limbed predator with chitinous armor and serrated mandibles. The moment it spotted them, it reared back, preparing to strike. Vryz'ka immediately signaled the team to raise their weapons. "Stay back. It will attack if provoked." Jake, however, did the opposite. "Whoa, easy there, big guy," he murmured, stepping forward. Vryz'ka's antennae flared in alarm. "Carter, do not." Jake crouched slightly and extended a hand, palm up. "It's okay, buddy. You're not so scary." The Zyrrak's multiple eyes locked onto him. Its body tensed, every instinct screaming that this was a predator about to pounce. Then, to the crew's utter shock, the Zyrrak hesitated. It tilted its massive head, mandibles clicking uncertainly. Jake wiggled his fingers invitingly. "Come on, I won't bite." After a long, tense pause, the Zyrrak approached. It lowered its enormous head toward Jake's outstretched hand. And then, against all logic, it nuzzled him. Jake grinned and immediately started scratching behind one of its mandibles. "That's it. See? You just needed some love." The Zyrrak made a deep, vibrating sound, something between a growl and a purr. It slumped down onto its massive haunches, tail thumping the ground like an oversized dog. The rest of the crew stood frozen in shock. Vryz'ka finally found his voice. "Impossible." Jake scratched behind the creature's jawline, grinning like a kid with a new puppy. "Nah, just gotta know where to scratch." The warrior Gorvath, who had been ready to shoot, slowly lowered his weapon. "I do not understand." Vryz'ka rubbed his mandibles together in exasperation. No one does. From that day forward, the crew of the Zyrrak Prime had to accept an undeniable truth. The human would attempt to pet anything. And, somehow, it would always work. The petting incident that almost started a war. The Galactic Union had spent decades negotiating a fragile peace with the Grawl Empire, a warlike species known for their rigid hierarchy and ruthless combat traditions. The Grawl respected only strength, and any perceived insult could escalate into an interstellar conflict, which was why Captain Vryz'ka was currently fighting the urge to molt in sheer stress. The Zyrrak Prime had been dispatched as part of a diplomatic delegation to Grawl Prime. Their mission was simple: maintain formalities, sign trade agreements, and most importantly, avoid doing anything that could be interpreted as disrespect. And yet, Vryz'ka's instincts told him disaster was imminent. Because Lieutenant Jake Carter was here, and Jake Carter had a problem. He petted things. The warlords' throne room. The delegation stood before Warlord Korgoth, the supreme leader of the Grawl Empire. He was a towering, heavily muscled being with obsidian scales and piercing yellow eyes. His armor was adorned with the skulls of defeated enemies. He radiated authority, flanked by two of his fiercest warriors. But it wasn't the warlord that had caught Jake's attention. It was the beast beside him, a massive bloodfawn war beast, a creature bred for battle, sat at Korgoth's side. Nearly 4 meters long, with spiked plating along its spine, it was a living weapon, engineered to kill without hesitation. Its eyes glowed with a predator's cold intelligence, and its claws dug into the stone floor, leaving deep gouges. Jake, standing near the back of the delegation, leaned toward Vryz'ka and whispered, "Dude, look at that thing. It's majestic." Vryz'ka's antennae twitched in alarm. "Carter, no." Jake barely acknowledged him. His gaze was fixed on the bloodfawn, his brain already making dangerous calculations. It had fur and scales, and those ears? Floppy. "Jake," Vryz'ka hissed. "That is the Grawl warlord's personal war beast. It has eaten people for looking at it the wrong way. You will not. I repeat, will not." Too late. Jake stepped forward. The moment, everything almost went to hell. The entire room tensed as the human approached the throne. Grawl warriors gripped their weapons. The Bloodfang's ears twitched, sensing the movement. Warlord Korgoth narrowed his eyes, already prepared to crush this insult beneath his boot. And then Jake, with all the casual ease of someone petting a golden retriever, scratched the bloodfawn behind its massive ear. For half a second, the galaxy itself seemed to pause. The Grawl warriors inhaled sharply. Hands gripped weapons. Captain Vryz'ka mentally prepared his resignation speech. Then, the impossible happened. The bloodfawn whimpered. Not in pain, not in aggression, but in pure, unfiltered pleasure. The massive beast, bred for war, genetically designed to be the perfect killing machine, let out a deep, satisfied huff. Its glowing eyes softened. Its spiked tail thumped once against the floor, hesitantly, then again, harder. Jake grinned. Who's a good boy?" The bloodfawn made a noise that no bloodfawn in recorded history had ever made. A happy noise. It flopped onto its side, presenting its massive armored belly. Jake, without hesitation, began rubbing it. The war beast, this legendary terror of the battlefield, responsible for countless deaths, wagged its spiked tail like an overgrown puppy. Jake laughed. "Oh yeah, that's the spot, huh?" The delegation stood frozen, every being in the room too stunned to process what they were witnessing. Finally, Warlord Korgoth spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "No being has ever tamed a bloodfawn." Jake, still scratching, looked up with a relaxed smile. "Really? Huh. Guess nobody tried belly rubs before." Silence. Vryz'ka wanted to die. An unlikely outcome. For several excruciating seconds, Korgoth studied Jake. Then, to everyone's shock, the warlord let out a slow, rumbling chuckle. "You are formidable." Vryz'ka's eyes widened. Had Korgoth just complimented the human? The warlord leaned forward. "Tell me, human, How did you do this? Jake shrugged. It's not hard. Just gotta know where to scratch. Korgith nodded thoughtfully, as if this was some great, profound wisdom. He turned to one of his warriors. Bring me another Bloodfang pup. Within moments, another juvenile Bloodfang was brought into the chamber. Korgith extended a clawed hand, hesitated, then mimicked Jake's movements, scratching behind its ear. The pup immediately leaned into the touch. The warlord's eyes widened. By the stars, a slow grin spread across Korgith's face. Human, he declared, your kind will be honored among the Grawl. You are beast whisperers. Vryz'ka, who had been bracing for an interstellar incident, sagged in relief. Against all logic, Jake had not started a war. He had somehow strengthened diplomatic relations. With belly rubs. Aftermath. As they left the throne room, Vryz'ka grabbed Jake by the shoulder. You're going to give me a heart attack. Jake grinned. Come on, Cap, admit it. Wasn't that awesome? Vryz'ka's mandibles clicked in frustration. I hate that it worked. Jake patted his arm. See? Even you're getting used to it. The captain swatted him away with an exasperated hiss. Jake just laughed, and the legend of the human who could pet anything continued to grow. The human problem spreads. Captain Vryz'ka had long accepted that Lieutenant Jake Carter was an anomaly, a problem even, but what he had failed to anticipate was that this problem would spread. Jake's bizarre habit of petting anything and everything had now reached a critical point. It was no longer contained to just their ship, nor even their diplomatic missions. No, Jake Carter's reputation had started changing the galaxy itself, and it was becoming a logistical nightmare. The ripple effect. The first sign of trouble came in the form of an official communique from the Galactic Union. Vryz'ka sat in his office, his mandibles clicking in irritation as he read the urgent message. The Union's ambassador to the Verlox Dominion had filed a complaint because multiple high-ranking Verlox officials were now requesting human advisors specifically trained in tactile bonding. Jake had, apparently, petted a Verlox diplomat's venomous battle mount during a peace summit. It had been a highly sensitive event, a delicate negotiation meant to ease tensions between the Dominion and the Union. Then Jake had walked up to the 10-legged, heavily armored beast that had previously been classified as untamable, and given its scritches behind its primary mandibles. Now, the Verlox government had declared humans to be beast whisperers and wanted more of them. Vryz'ka groaned and rubbed his face. This was just the beginning. The black market incident. Shortly after the Verlox debacle, the ship received an urgent distress signal from a Union patrol vessel. Captain Gorvath, the security chief, reported grimly. The Union has intercepted communications about a growing black market demand for human tactile specialists. Vryz'ka's antennae twitched. What? Gorvath exhaled heavily. Several species, especially those with war beasts, security drones, or difficult-to-train animals, have heard rumors about the humans' abilities. Criminal syndicates are now attempting to acquire humans to work as illegal animal tamers. Vryz'ka nearly knocked over his datapad. You're telling me that Jake has inadvertently created an intergalactic petting industry? It would seem so, Captain. The security chief crossed his massive arms. Union forces are trying to shut it down, but the demand is growing. Apparently, even some criminal bosses are offering ridiculous sums for human bonding experts. Vryz'ka felt an overwhelming urge to slam his head against the wall. The Merchant Guild debacle. The breaking point came when the Zyrrak Prime docked at a major trading hub. They were supposed to have a routine supply stop. Instead, the moment Jake stepped onto the station, chaos erupted. A delegation of merchants, representing multiple species, rushed forward, each clamoring for his attention. Human, please, test our domesticated hatchlings. We have an experimental security droid that requires imprinting. Our prized livestock refuses to bond with anyone. Only you can solve this. Jake, to his credit, looked as baffled as Vryz'ka felt. A what? The merchants began offering money. A wealthy Trelvan trader waved a datapad. 50,000 credits, if you can tame my war scareth. Another merchant upped the ante. 70,000 if you can make my guard droid accept a new owner. Vryz'ka grabbed Jake by the collar and dragged him away before a full-blown bidding war could break out. Crisis control. Back on the ship, Vryz'ka paced in front of Jake, antennae twitching furiously. This is out of control. Do you realize what you've done? Jake threw up his hands. Hey man, I didn't do anything. I just pet things. Vryz'ka whirled on him. And now, entire governments are demanding human tactile specialists. There's a black market trying to buy humans. The merchant guilds are practically worshipping you. Jake scratched the back of his head. Okay, yeah, that does sound bad when you put it like that. The captain let out a long, suffering hiss. From now on, you are under strict orders not to touch any new life forms without my express permission. Jake grinned. But Cap, what if? No. Jake sighed dramatically. You're no fun. Vryz'ka pinched the bridge of his mandibles. I was fun before I met you. The final straw. The very next day, the Zyrrak Prime received another urgent communique. This time, it was from the Grawl Empire. Warlord Korgith himself appeared on the holoscreen. His massive, battle-scarred face looked far too pleased. Captain Vryz'ka, he boomed. I demand the human. Vryz'ka felt his exoskeleton tighten. Excuse me. Korgith crossed his arms. Our Bloodfang breeding program has tripled in efficiency since your human demonstrated scritching techniques. My generals are now conducting research into combat-enhancing belly rubs. Vryz'ka's mandibles clattered in horror. What? Korgith grinned. I require Carter's presence to oversee further trials. Vryz'ka buried his face in his hands. Jake, meanwhile, leaned toward the screen. You got more Bloodfangs? Man, I'd love to meet. Vryz'ka slapped the console, ending the call immediately. He turned to Jake, his eyes burning with the barely restrained fury of a captain pushed to his absolute limit. You're never leaving this ship again. Jake blinked. Wait, am I under house arrest? Vryz'ka threw up his arms. Yes. Jake grinned. Worth it. Epilogue. The legend grows. Despite Vryz'ka's best efforts, the legend of the human who could pet anything only continued to spread. New scientific journals emerged, theorizing about the human effect, the strange way humans seem to bond with creatures that should otherwise be hostile. Military strategists debated the tactical applications of tactile-based morale boosting. The Grawl Empire was actively researching battle bonding techniques. And somewhere in the criminal underworld, someone was probably still trying to smuggle humans for high-priced exotic petting services. Vryz'ka sat in his office, staring blankly at the ceiling. His ship was fine. His crew was safe. The galaxy was technically better off. And yet, somehow, he knew deep in his core, this was only the beginning.